A well-known Democrat journalist, notorious for their biased reporting, invites Trump for an exclusive primetime interview. Their goal is clear: to humiliate him on live television by painting him as uninformed, dishonest, and incapable. The media hypes up the event as a reckoning, with left-leaning outlets framing it as a moment that will expose Trump's supposed incompetence. Trump, fully aware of the trap, accepts the invitation confidently, prepared with an arsenal of facts, statistics, and past receipts to counter any attempt at deception. The setting is a grand, dimly lit television studio, where the stage is designed to place the journalist in a position of dominance, with strategically placed lighting and camera angles that subtly favor them. The audience, mostly composed of self-proclaimed political intellectuals and liberal elites, is primed to cheer at every perceived gotcha moment against Trump. As the event begins, the journalist, a sharp-dressed and smug figure, starts with a patronizing introduction, hinting that Trump's policies have been catastrophic and that the American people are worse off due to his decisions. The network's cheer-ins flash headlines reinforcing this narrative, attempting to set the tone before Trump even speaks. The journalist begins by highlighting a list of controversial moments from Trump's presidency, cherry-picking instances where his words were taken out of context and presenting them as irrefutable proof of his supposed incompetence. They reference previous interviews where Trump was fact-checked by left-leaning organizations, framing these as undeniable truths rather than partisan attacks. Trump sits calmly, allowing the journalists to exhaust their opening theatrics, maintaining an expression that conveys both patience and restrained amusement. As the monologue drags on, the journalist's words grow more cutting, bordering on outright mockery, with subtle jabs disguised as intellectual critiques. The audience reacts accordingly, laughing and nodding in agreement, as if the interview is more of a stage performance than an honest discussion. What they don't realize, however, is that Trump has already anticipated every single move they are making. He understands the game, and he has come prepared. While the journalist revels in their moment of perceived dominance, Trump's demeanor remains unwavering, his confidence unshaken. The segment cuts to a brief commercial break, during which the network producers smirk among themselves, believing that Trump has already been backed into a corner. But as the cameras return, what happens next will flip the entire narrative on its head. As the cameras come back from the commercial break, the journalist leans forward with a smug smile, clearly eager to begin what they believe will be the systematic dismantling of Trump's credibility. With a condescending tone, they launch into the first line of attack, cherry-picking statistics and statements from left-leaning think tanks, all carefully framed to paint Trump as a failure. "Mr. Trump," the journalist begins, pausing dramatically to let the audience settle into silence, "your administration's handling of the economy has been widely criticized. Under your leadership, income inequality widened, job growth slowed, and your tax cuts overwhelmingly benefited the rich. Do you still stand by your claim that you were, in your words, the greatest jobs president ever?" The journalist leans back, smirking, as if daring Trump to challenge what they believe to be indisputable facts. The audience chuckles softly, sensing an early victory. Trump, however, remains unfazed. He tilts his head slightly and smiles, a knowing expression that suggests he's been waiting for this moment. Instead of responding immediately, he allows the tension to build, letting the journalist and the audience assume that he is searching for an answer. The journalist, misinterpreting the pause as hesitation, pushes further. In fact, they continue, "Experts have shown that wage growth under your presidency was stagnant compared to your predecessors. And let's not forget that your handling of the COVID-19 pandemic led to historic unemployment numbers. How do you respond to the claim that your presidency was an economic disaster for the working class?" The audience erupts in applause, convinced that Trump has been caught in a corner. But then, with a calm and deliberate voice, Trump responds. "Well," he says, adjusting his tie, "first of all, that's completely wrong." The audience, momentarily taken aback by his confidence, quiets down. The journalist blinks, momentarily caught off guard by Trump's directness. "Let's talk facts," Trump continues. "During my presidency, we saw record low unemployment for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and women. That's not my opinion. That's data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Wages grew at the fastest rate in decades, and my tax cuts put more money back in the pockets of middle-class Americans. You can call it a gift to the rich all you want, but the truth is, the average American family saved thousands of dollars. That's why the economy was booming before the pandemic hit. He pauses, letting the weight of his words sink in. The journalist, sensing that the audience is actually listening, attempts to regain control. But Mr. Trump, let's be honest, your tax policies added trillions to the deficit, and your deregulation efforts only help corporations, not everyday Americans. They speak faster now, attempting to reframe the discussion before Trump can gain momentum. And let's not forget, they add, that your administration's COVID response was widely regarded as one of the worst in modern history. They glance at the audience, seeking reassurance, but Trump remains composed. Wrong again, Trump replies, shaking his head slightly. First of all, we had the fastest economic recovery in history after the pandemic. The stock market hit record highs, businesses reopened, and we had a V-shaped recovery. You want to talk about deficits? Find Biden's spending has added more to the deficit in 2 years than my administration did in 4. But you don't talk about that, do you? He turns slightly toward the audience, making direct eye contact. And let's talk about COVID. I shut down travel from China before anyone else. I got Operation Warp Speed done in record time. We had a vaccine in less than a year. But the media, your network included, attacked me for it. Call me racist for the China travel ban. Said the vaccine was rushed. And now, after Biden took over, you all pretend none of that ever happened. The audience, once so sure of Trump's defeat, now seems hesitant. Some murmur among themselves, realizing that Trump is presenting facts that don't align with the narrative they've been fed. The journalist, realizing that they're losing control, scrambles for a rebuttal. But experts, they begin, only for Trump to cut them off. Experts? Which ones, he asks, raising an eyebrow. The same experts who said inflation wasn't a problem under Biden? The same ones who said gas prices wouldn't go up? The ones who told you to keep schools closed when I was saying they needed to open? The American people are smart. They see through this nonsense. He gestures toward the audience. You see through it, don't you? There's an awkward silence. The journalist, clearly flustered, shuffles their papers, looking for the next line of attack. But for the first time in the interview, it's clear that Trump is in control. The air in the studio shifts. The journalist, who entered the interview brimming with confidence, now fidgets slightly in their seat, realizing that the debate is no longer under their control. The audience, once eager to laugh at every jab thrown at Trump, now sits in an uncomfortable silence, sensing that the momentum has changed. The journalist clears their throat and attempts to pivot. All right, Mr. Trump, they say, trying to regain their composure. Let's move on to another topic where your record has been widely criticized, your handling of foreign policy. Many argue that your America First approach weakened our relationships with key allies and emboldened dictators. You pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, alienated European leaders, and cozied up to strongmen like Putin and Kim Jong-un. How do you defend that record? They lean forward slightly, hoping this will be the point where they can trip him up. Trump doesn't hesitate. That's a great question, he says, flashing a confident smile, because it gives me another chance to expose the nonsense you and the media push every day. He raises a hand, ticking off his points one by one. First, let's talk about NATO. You claim I alienated our allies, but what I actually did was make them pay their fair share. Before I took office, the U.S. was carrying the burden of NATO while Germany, France, and other countries weren't meeting their commitments. I told them, you need to step up, and guess what? They did. Billions of dollars came in because I demanded fairness. That's leadership, not alienation. The journalist opens their mouth, but Trump holds up a hand to stop them. Now, Iran, you say I pulled out of the nuclear deal like that was a bad thing. Let's be honest, the deal was a disaster. We gave them billions, and in return, they kept developing nuclear weapons behind our backs. I ended that deal and put the strongest sanctions in history on them, crippling their economy. And let's not forget that under my administration, we took out Qasem Soleimani, the #1 terrorist in the Middle East. Do you think that made the world less safe? He pauses for effect. No, it made the world a lot safer. Even your network admitted that at the time, though you don't talk about it now. The journalist shifts uncomfortably, but Trump isn't finished. Now let's talk about cozying up to Putin and Kim Jong-un. See, this is what you people in the media don't understand. Diplomacy isn't about being weak, it's about being strong. When I met with Kim, we went from fire and fury to no new missile tests. Under Biden, North Korea is testing missiles again. Why? Because they don't respect him. Same with Putin. Under my administration, Russia didn't invade Ukraine. Under Biden, they did. You tell me, who was stronger? He leans back in his chair, watching as the journalist scrambles to regain footing. But Mr. Trump, they stammer, your own intelligence officials said Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help you. Trump shakes his head. Here we go again. The Russia hoax. Let's not forget that it was your network that pushed the fake Steele dossier. It was the Democrats who made up that whole lie. 4 years of Russia, 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 and at the end of the day, it was all nonsense. Even the FBI admitted it. And by the way, since we're talking about elections, why don't you ever talk about how Zuckerberg dumped millions into Democrat districts in 2020? Why don't you talk about ballot harvesting? Or to the Hunter Biden laptop story that your network helped cover up? Because the truth is, you don't care about election interference, you only care when it's convenient for you. The audience murmurs again. The journalist, realizing they are losing ground fast, quickly moves to another topic. All right, let's talk about January 6th, they say, gripping their notes. Many say you incited an insurrection, that you put democracy itself at risk. You told your supporters to fight like hell, and hours later, the Capitol was under attack. Do you take any responsibility for what happened that day? Trump's expression hardens. Let me tell you something, he says, his voice firm. I told my supporters to peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard. That's a fact. But your network conveniently leaves that part out. And let's talk about the so-called insurrection. You want to talk about real threats to democracy? How about the summer of 2020, when BLM and Antifa burned cities, attacked police, and looted businesses? How about the Democrat politicians who encouraged it? Kamala Harris raised money to bail out rioters. Democrats called it mostly peaceful, while buildings burned behind them. But you don't call that an insurrection, do you? The journalist opens their mouth but stops. There is no good counter to Trump's point. And let's be clear, Trump continues, his voice rising slightly. I offered 10,000 National Guard troops to secure the Capitol before January 6th, but Pelosi and the mayor of D.C. turned it down. Why? Because they wanted chaos. They wanted a narrative. And you, your network, helped push that fake narrative. You called it an insurrection, but you don't talk about how undercover federal agents were in the crowd that day. You don't talk about why security was so weak. You don't ask real questions, you just push a political agenda. The journalist is visibly rattled. They shuffle their notes, realizing that every attack they have launched has been met with a fact-driven counterstrike. The audience, once eager to cheer at Trump's humiliation, now listens with uncertainty. Sensing the shift, Trump leans in slightly. See, this is why people don't trust the media anymore, he says. You come in here thinking you're going to embarrass me with your little talking points. But the truth is, you're the ones who should be embarrassed. You push lies, you ignore facts, and you protect one side while attacking the other. And guess what? The American people see it. The journalist, speechless, glances toward the producers off camera. The interview is slipping away from them, and they know it. But the worst is yet to come. The tension in the studio is palpable. The journalist, once so assured in their ability to control the narrative, now looks visibly shaken. Their carefully crafted talking points have crumbled under the weight of Trump's counterarguments. And for the first time, the audience is no longer playing their expected role. Murmurs ripple through the crowd as people exchange glances, clearly reconsidering what they had believed to be undeniable truths. The shift is subtle at first, a few audience members nodding along with Trump's words, others leaning forward, intrigued rather than hostile. The journalist, noticing this, attempts to recover. "Mr. Trump," they say, forcing a smirk to mask their unease, "it's clear you have a talent for spinning facts, but let's talk about your reputation. Many Americans see you as divisive, even dangerous. Your rhetoric has been accused of fueling hatred, emboldening extremists, and deepening our country's divisions. Do you truly believe you bear no responsibility for the political climate we have today?" The question is meant to be a trap, a final attempt to paint Trump as the root of America's problems. But Trump is ready. He clasps his hands together, glancing briefly at the journalist before turning his attention directly to the audience, making them part of the conversation. "You know," he begins, his tone measured but firm, "this is the game they always play. They say I'm divisive, but what they really mean is that I don't back down. I fight for what I believe in, and I fight for you, the American people. They don't call it divisive when Democrats attack me, when they call my supporters deplorables, racist, or threats to democracy. No, that's just speaking truth to power, right?" He raises an eyebrow, allowing the hypocrisy to settle in the audience's minds. A few scattered claps echo through the studio. The journalist's eyes dart to the producers, unsure of how to respond. Trump continues, his voice gaining strength. "Let's talk about real division. When I was in office, I pushed for economic opportunity for everyone, record low unemployment for minorities, criminal justice reform that helped Black and Hispanic communities, rebuilding American manufacturing, bringing jobs back from overseas. But instead of reporting on that, the media pushed one story after another, trying to paint me as a villain. Every single day, it was Trump is a racist, Trump is a dictator, Trump is destroying democracy. And now you sit here and ask why the country is divided. It's divided because of people like you, the media, the politicians, the elites who want to control everything and silence anyone who disagrees with them." The audience reacts more this time, some clapping, others whispering among themselves. The journalist's grip on their pen tightens. "Let's talk about extremism," Trump says, seizing the moment. "They love to talk about the so-called far right, but why don't we talk about the radical left? The people who burned down cities in 2020. The people who call for defunding the police, then hide behind private security when crime skyrockets. The people who push for open borders while living in gated communities. They talk about threats to democracy while they censor speech, shut down dissent, and weaponize the justice system against their political opponents. You want to talk about real extremism? Look in the mirror." The journalist stammers. "But, Mr. Trump..." Trump cuts them off, his voice commanding. No, let me finish. "You and the media have spent years calling my supporters domestic terrorists, white supremacists, threats to democracy. You demonize millions of hardworking Americans just because they don't agree with you. And then you wonder why people don't trust the media anymore." He gestures to the audience. "You're seeing it right now. People are waking up. The shift in the audience is undeniable." Some who had entered the studio expecting to see Trump humiliated now sit in deep thought. Some nod along. Others who had cheered for the journalist now fold their arms, reconsidering their stance. Even some of the most adamant skeptics now appear unsettled, not because they suddenly support Trump, but because they can't deny that he is making sense. The journalist, desperate to regain control, forces a laugh. "Well, Mr. Trump, it sounds like you've mastered the art of playing the victim. But let's talk about your biggest loss, the 2020 election. You continue to claim it was stolen, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Isn't it time to move on?" Trump leans forward, locking eyes with the journalist. The studio is dead silent. "Overwhelming evidence," he repeats, his tone carrying the weight of both amusement and challenge. Overwhelming evidence of what? That an election where key swing states stopped counting votes overnight, only to resume with sudden spikes for one candidate, was totally fair? That mass mail-in ballots, which even Democrats used to say were vulnerable to fraud, were completely secure? That Zuckerberg's millions, ballot harvesting, and big tech censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story had no impact? He shakes his head. You see, this is why people don't trust the media. You don't investigate. You don't ask questions. You just repeat talking points. And you wonder why people are angry. The audience is no longer indifferent. Some openly clap, others nod. A few still shake their heads, but the certainty in their disapproval is gone. The journalist is out of options. They glance toward the camera, toward their producers, hoping for a way out. But there isn't one. The carefully controlled narrative they had planned has collapsed. The turning point has arrived, and Trump now commands the stage. Trump smirks. You thought this was going to be easy, didn't you? He says. The journalist tries to respond, but their words falter. And just like that, the balance of power in the interview has shifted completely. The journalist's face is tense, their confidence all but drained. The energy in the studio has shifted entirely. What was supposed to be a triumphant takedown of Trump has become an unmitigated disaster for them. Their once reliable tactics, loaded questions, cherry-picked statistics, and smug condescension have all failed. The audience is no longer with them. Instead of nodding along or laughing at Trump, many are now focused on him with an intensity that suggests they're actually listening, perhaps for the first time in years. Trump, sensing his opponent's weakness, leans back in his chair, exuding the effortless confidence of a man who knows he has already won. He gives the journalist a slight smirk, waiting to see what their next move will be. Desperate, the journalist scrambles for a new attack. They flip through their notes, eyes darting as they search for something, anything that might put Trump back on the defensive. Finally, they latch onto one last weapon, character attacks. Mr. Trump, they say, voice slightly strained, throughout your career, you've been accused of being dishonest, of bending the truth to fit your narrative. Even now, fact-checkers are reviewing your statements and finding discrepancies. How can the American people trust anything you say when you have a history of, well, let's just say, alternative facts? The journalist sits back, trying to regain control. It's a familiar strategy. Attack Trump's credibility directly and hope it sticks. Trump chuckles. Oh, I love this one, he says, shaking his head. The media loves to call me a liar, but let's be real. Who lies more than the media? You? Your network. The so-called fact-checkers, who always seem to fact-check conservatives but let Biden get away with everything. The journalist bristles. That's not true. We fact-check everyone. Trump raises a hand, cutting them off. Oh, really? Then where were your fact-checks when Biden said inflation was transitory? When he said he never talked business with Hunter? When he said gas prices were high because of Putin, even though they started rising the moment he took office? Where were your fact-checks when Democrats pushed the Russia hoax for years, even after it was proven false? The journalist swallows hard. The audience, which was once unquestioningly hostile toward Trump, now watches with a mixture of intrigue and skepticism, not toward Trump, but toward the journalist. And let's talk about these fact-checkers you love so much, Trump continues. Do you know who funds them? Do you know how many of them have ties to Democrat donors, think tanks, and activists? They're not fact-checkers. They're opinion checkers. They don't check facts. They shape narratives. And you use them as a shield to pretend you're objective, when in reality, you're just pushing propaganda. The journalist stammers. That's ridiculous. Fact-checking organizations are independent. Trump cuts in. Independent? Give me a break. You think the people who work at PolitiFact, Snopes, or the Washington Post fact-checker are neutral? They're all left-wing activists disguised as journalists. And the American people know it. A murmur ripples through the audience. The journalist sees it, hears it, and knows the interview is spiraling out of their control. But they still have one last trick up their sleeve: personal attacks. If they can't beat Trump on policy, maybe they can break his composure. "All right, Mr. Trump," the journalist says, forcing a smirk, "let's talk about you. Your rhetoric, your scandals, your behavior. You've been accused of racism, misogyny, corruption. You've been impeached twice. You've been indicted. Doesn't all of this prove that you're unfit to lead?" The journalist leans forward, waiting for Trump to stumble. Instead, Trump laughs. Actually laughs. "Wow," he says, shaking his head. "You really thought that was going to work, huh?" The journalist's smirk falters. "Let's go one by one," Trump continues. "Racism. I was the guy who gave historic funding to HBCUs, created the Platinum Plan for Black economic opportunity, and passed criminal justice reform, which Biden helped create the crime bill that put thousands of Black Americans in prison. Misogyny. More women worked in my administration than any Republican president before me. Corruption. The only people proven to be corrupt are the Bidens. Where's your outrage about that?" The journalist tries to interject, but Trump isn't done. "And impeachment. You mean the fake impeachment based on a phone call where I was proven right? Or the second impeachment that was a sham to keep me out of politics? And let's not forget, both times I was acquitted. So what does that tell you?" He leans in. "It tells you the system is corrupt. It tells you the media, the Democrats, and the Washington establishment will do anything to stop me because they know I fight for the people, not the elites." The journalist stammers, caught in a losing battle. "And as for these indictments," Trump adds, his voice dripping with amusement, "do you really think anyone believes this isn't politically motivated? They're scared of me. They know I'm coming back, and they'll do anything to stop it. But you know what? It's not working. The people see through it. The audience is no longer just murmuring. There are clear signs of agreement. Scattered applause. Even those who don't support Trump seem forced to acknowledge that he is making sense." The journalist, seeing collapse of their once infallible plan, glances desperately at the camera, hoping the producers will cut to commercial, but no signal comes. They are trapped in this moment, facing the wreckage of their own failed ambush. Trump leans back, crosses his arms, and smirks. "This didn't go the way you thought it would, did it?" The journalist has no response. The carefully scripted takedown has become an unmitigated disaster. And the worst part? Millions are watching. The interview has gone completely off the rails, not for Trump, but for the journalists and their network. What was supposed to be a public takedown, a triumphant moment of media dominance over Trump, has instead become one of the most humiliating failures in their career. The carefully laid traps, the pre-scripted gotcha questions, the smug tone, all of it has crumbled under the weight of Trump's counterpunches, his command of facts, and his ability to expose media hypocrisy in real time. The audience, which began the night primed to jeer at Trump, now sits in stunned silence, whispering among themselves. Some look genuinely shaken, as if they've just realized that the narrative they had trusted for years might not be as airtight as they once believed. Others, who had remained skeptics of the media all along, now smirk knowingly, enjoying the way Trump has flipped the script. And then there are those who were never Trump supporters but now find themselves questioning the journalist's credibility, recognizing the obvious bias and manipulation that have been attempted. The journalist, clearly out of options, forces a stiff smile and attempts to wrap things up. "Well, Mr. Trump, I think we've covered a lot tonight," they say, trying to sound composed, though their voice betrays their frustration. "I appreciate you taking the time to answer these questions." Trump smirks, not letting them off the hook so easily. "Oh, I had a great time," he says, glancing at the camera. "I think the American people did too. Finally got to see some real truth instead of the usual fake news, right?" There's a moment of hesitation before the audience reacts, not with hostility, but with genuine applause. It's not the overwhelming cheers of a MAGA rally, but it's enough to make the journalist visibly uncomfortable. They weren't expecting this. The camera crew signals that the segment is over, and the lights dim slightly as the show cuts to commercial. But the damage is done. The journalist sighs heavily, rubbing their forehead as they pull off their microphone. Producers rush over, whispering frantically, trying to strategize how they'll spin this disaster into something salvageable. Trump, meanwhile, stands up, shakes a few hands, and waves to the audience. He's completely at ease, as if he had just finished a friendly debate instead of dismantling a mainstream media attack in real time. He turns to the journalist, extending a hand. "Good effort," he says with a grin, his tone making it clear that he knows exactly how badly they lost. The journalist hesitates, then shakes his hand with a tight-lipped smile before turning away. The cameras are off, but the fallout is only just beginning. Within minutes, clips from the interview start circulating on social media. Conservatives celebrate it as yet another example of Trump outmaneuvering the media, while even some moderates and independents begin questioning the journalist's tactics. The full unedited interview racks up millions of views overnight, with titles like "Trump Destroys Biased Reporter" and "Mainstream Media's Worst Nightmare Comes True." Liberal pundits scramble to control the narrative, trying to spin the interview as an example of Trump bullying journalists. Some claim the audience was unfairly influenced, that Trump hijacked the conversation. But the problem is, everyone saw what really happened. The raw footage is everywhere, and the media's usual tricks, selective editing, misquoting, won't work this time. Political analysts on both sides weigh in. Some admit, begrudgingly, that Trump demonstrated a mastery of the facts and outmaneuvered the journalist at every turn. Others, particularly those in liberal media, scramble to blame the journalist for not being prepared enough, as if better framing would have saved them. The biggest blow, however, comes when even some left-leaning viewers begin expressing doubts. Tweets and posts emerge from people who say they never liked Trump, but now realize how blatantly biased the media is. "I still don't support him," one viral post reads, "but this interview made me rethink everything I thought I knew." The network executives hold emergency meetings. The journalist, once considered a rising star in left-wing media, now finds themselves under fire, not for being biased, but for failing to control Trump. Other journalists, eager to distance themselves from the disaster, begin subtly criticizing their colleague. "If I had conducted that interview, some hint on social media, I would have held Trump accountable." The network itself attempts to spin the disaster by inviting a panel of experts to dissect Trump's misleading statements, but it falls flat. The public isn't buying it. The ratings for the post-interview segment are abysmal compared to the interview itself. People are no longer interested in being told what to think. They want raw, unfiltered truth. Meanwhile, Trump capitalizes on the moment. He releases a statement saying, "The fake news tried to take me down again, and once again, they failed." The American people are waking up. His campaign seizes the momentum, incorporating clips from the interview into fundraising ads. Supporters flood social media, celebrating yet another Trump victory over the media machine. The journalist, now widely mocked and ridiculed, takes a brief hiatus from television, officially for personal reasons, but everyone knows the truth. Their credibility has been shattered. Every future interview they conduct will be met with skepticism. Every future debate will be overshadowed by this one humiliating night. Trump, on the other hand, rides the wave of momentum. His approval ratings among independents tick upward. Even some Democrats, fed up with media manipulation, quietly admit that he made strong points. The interview, originally meant to destroy him, has instead solidified him as the one politician who cannot be controlled by the media. And as Trump steps onto the stage at his next rally, thousands of supporters chant a new phrase, inspired by his latest victory. "We see through it. We see through it." Smiling, Trump steps up to the microphone and says, "They tried to shut us down again, folks. But guess what? The people are smarter than the fake news thinks. They see through it. And in 2024, we're going to make sure America sees through all of it." The crowd erupts. The media may have tried to destroy Trump again, but in the end, all they did was prove him right.